When there is an ending, there was a beginning. Every victim has a picture to paint. Every true crime has its time and place. Please join our MJ podcast, the series Deep into the Woods, Missing Persons, Unsolved Crimes, and the Does. Welcome to our MJ podcast, the series Cases from the Deep Freezer, Missing Persons, Unsolved Crimes, and the Does. This is Episode 20, Part 1, the 1956 Unsolved Murders of the Grimes Sisters. My name is Mark, and I will be your host for tonight's show. Joining me later is our co-host and a guest speaker. We are coming to you from our home office in Plattsburgh, New York. In 1956, some of the national news headlines read, November 7th, 1956, Suez Crisis. The United Nations General Assembly adopts a resolution calling for the United Kingdom, France, and Israel to immediately withdraw their troops from Egypt. November 12, 1956, Morocco, Sudan, and Tunisia joins the United Nations. November 13, 1956, the Supreme Court of the United States declares Alabama laws requiring segregated buses illegal, thus ending the Montgomery bus boycott. December 4th, 1956, the $1 Million Quartet, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash get together at Sun Studios for the first and last time. December 19th, 1956, Irish-born physician John Bokens Adams is arrested in connection with suspicious deaths of more than 160 patients, but Adams is convicted only of minor charges. December 28, 1956, two young sisters disappear from Chicago, Illinois. On December 28, 1956, 15-year-old Barbara and 12-year-old Patricia Grimes left their home in the McKinley Park neighborhood of Chicago at 7:30 p.m. The two sisters were heading to a movie theater in the Brighton Park neighborhood of Chicago, around 1.5 miles from their home. It is unknown how the two sisters traveled to the Brighton Theater on this date, but on previous occasions, the two sisters either walked or traveled by bus. The two sisters promised their mother they would be home around midnight, meaning the two sisters were going to watch the second screening of Love Me Tender, and they would be expected to return home at approximately 11:45 p.m. The Grimes sisters were seen at the movie theater in Brighton Park neighborhood of Chicago. The two sisters were watching the Elvis Presley film Love Me Tender at the Brighton Park Theater. Barbara and Patricia also were known to have been devoted fans of Presley. This trip to the theater was the 11th time the girls had viewed this film of Presley's. Barbara and Patricia were good students in school. When Barbara and Patricia had not arrived home by midnight, their mother sent their older sister and a brother to wait by the bus stop located closest to the family home for their arrival. After 3 buses had driven by without the sisters showing up at the designated stops, their sister and brother returned home. Their mother at this stage had contacted the sisters' friends, and no one had talked or seen them. When their mother, seeing the return of the sister and brother she had sent to the bus stop coming home without their sisters, she filed a missing persons reports on her daughters with the Chicago Police Department at 2:15 a.m. on December 29, 1956. A school friend of Patricia named Dorothy would later inform investigators she had been seated behind the girls with her own younger sister during the film. Dorothy and her younger sister left the movie theater at the intermission around 9:30 p.m. As they had done so, Dorothy saw the Grimes sisters standing in line to purchase popcorn. The two had seemed to be in good spirits, and Dorothy and her younger sister didn't notice anything odd in their demeanor. Several teenagers who had been at the Brighton Theater on December 28, 1956, did inform investigators they had seen the two sisters talking with and then entering a car driven by a young man whose physical appearance had been similar to that of Elvis Presley. The vehicle described by these witnesses was consistently described as being a Mercury model. At that time, law enforcement initially assigned to the case said it was possible the two sisters had either ran away from home or were voluntarily staying with boyfriends. They did this publicly despite the protests from the missing sisters' parents. Many people didn't buy into that, for the girls' ages were 15 and 12 with an outstanding upbringing. The disappearance of the Grimes sisters sparked one of the largest missing person cases in the history of Cook County. A task force devoted solely to locating the sisters was formed, with a ground search on December 29th being helped by hundreds of local volunteers. Police conducted door-to-door canvassing throughout Brighton Park, and numerous canals and rivers were dragged. Over 300,000 people would be questioned, and some 2,000 individuals subjected to serious interrogation pertaining to their potential involvement. The two arrests and charges brought against two individuals who confessed to the crime, but their confessions suddenly broke down and collapsed. One individual, Edward Bedwell, stated that he had been coerced into giving a confession after being subjected to a prolonged interrogation. Let's take a pause for the cause, and when we return, you will hear about the discovery of missing Barbara and Patricia Grimes. Be back in a moment. MJA would like to give a special shout out to the Corbin Connection comedy channel on YouTube. Mr. Corbin is a very funny man with his three alter egos. Once again, that's the Corbin Connection on the comedy channel on YouTube. Check it out. Thank you. Homicide 101. We are taught as investigators that most homicides are committed by someone the victim knew, because stranger on stranger homicides are said to be rare. But in my way of thinking, you are already giving yourself tunnel vision thinking that way. Yes, there are common murder suspect profiles that can dictate common factors. Because of a suspect's behavior, it could lead you to think that way, but that doesn't make it true. But you always work from the people closest to the victim, working your way out. That's a given concerning homicides. If the people closest to the victim are ruled out, you will find working your way out from family and friends is like shifting gears, and you have to develop suspects. Things have changed through the years that a suspect's MO with a little staging could lead investigators to think the victim knew their killer, when in fact it turns out it's not true. That's putting more distance between the suspect and the case, when the truth is it was a stranger on stranger homicide. Certain killers can exhibit planning skills to do such a murder without getting caught. Sometimes they're fueled by anger, rage, passion, and sometimes a sexual component. Those components during a crime could lead you to other factors, making police think the victim knew their killer. In my 40 years plus as an investigator, I have seen murder suspects pick a certain trait of a killer profile and use that MO when in fact they are the totally opposite. That's ice cold composure. Nothing surprised me about killers anymore. Welcome back to our MJA podcast, the series Cases from the Deep Freezer. This is episode 20, part 1. The 1956 Unsolved Murders of the Grimes Sisters. The discovery 25 days later. On January 22, 1957, after a quick thaw of the recent snowfall, a construction worker named Prescott spotted behind a guardrail as he drove along a rural country road what he later described as believing the forms may be mannequins. Prescott was driving on German Church Road around 200 feet east of County Line Road near Willow Springs, Illinois. Still being unsure, Prescott later returned to the site with his wife, who fainted upon taking a closer look at what her husband had seen. The body forms were actually nude. The frozen bodies of the Grimes sisters. The Prescotts immediately reported their findings to the Willow Springs Police Department. The sisters' bodies lay upon a flat, horizontal section of a snow-covered ground directly behind the guardrail, which extended for just 10 feet before the incline of the embankment of Devil's Creek. The killer or killers posed the Grimes sisters' bodies to gain a graphic shock over the person that makes the discovery. The sisters' father, Joseph Grimes, was driven to the crime scene to formally identify both bodies. 3 wounds, resembling those inflicted by an ice pick, was discovered upon Barbara's chest, and injuries resembling blunt force trauma was visible upon her face and head, whereas numerous injuries resembling bruises were also discovered upon Patricia's face and body. Following the initial positive identification of the bodies, over 160 police officers from several suburban Chicago police departments, assisted by numerous local volunteers, conducted a search of the crime scene with the additional assistance of the forest preserves. This search uncovered little or no real evidence linked to the crime. The autopsy. The autopsies on the 2 sisters would be performed by 3 experienced forensic pathologists following a 5-hour examination of each body. Even though they couldn't agree on a lot of things concerning the case, but they did agree that both girls most likely died within approximately 5 hours of the time they were last seen alive at the Brighton Theater. The most likely time of death of each sister to have been either the late evening of December 28th or the early morning of December 29th, 1956. There were no fatal wounds that was discovered upon the girl's body. The toxicology report revealed that neither girl had been drunk, drugged, or poisoned prior to their death. Autopsy states that Barbara had likely engaged in sexual intercourse around the time of her death. The official death certificates on both Barbara and Patricia would list their causes of death as being murder. In both cases was listed as being secondary shock resulting from exposure to the low temperatures which had reduced each girl's body temperature below the critical level compatible with life. The chief investigator for the Cook County Coroner's Office disagreed with the official time of death, later stating to the media that there had been numerous marks of violence on those girls' faces, strongly indicative of being the recipients of violence as opposed to post-mortem rodent infestation. The chief investigator also contended that a thin layer of ice found encrusted upon the sisters' bodies indicated that they had most likely been alive until at least January 7th, since only after that date would there have been sufficient snowfall to react with the girls' natural body heat in such a climate and create the layer of ice discovered upon their nude bodies in this location. He contended this fact proved their bodies had been warmed when their bodies had been deposited beside German Church Road, since only after January 7th had there been sufficient snow to create an ice layer upon and around their bodies. In addition to these facts, the chief investigator also stated that both girls had been subjected to sexual assaults throughout their period of captivity, adding that the autopsy conducted upon Patricia had discovered semen within the vaginal fluid swab from her body. Let's take a pause for the cause, and when we return, our co-host, Miss Cali, will be on the line. Be back in a moment.
When you walk through the garden, gotta watch your back. Oh, I beg your pardon. Walk the straight and narrow track. If you walk with Jesus, He's gonna save your soul. You gotta keep a devil way down in a hole. He's got the fire and the fury at his command. Well, you don't have to worry if you hold on to Jesus' hand, and we'll all be safe from Satan when the thunder rolls. Just gotta help me keep the devil way down in the hole. Way down in the hole. Way down in the hole.
When you walk through the garden, watch your back. Well, I beg your pardon. Walk the straight and narrow track. If you walk with Jesus, save your soul. Gotta keep the devil down in the hole. He's got fire and the fury
Welcome back to our MJ podcast, this series, Cold Cases from the Deep Freezer. This is episode 20, part 1, the 1956 Unsolved Murders of the Grimes Sisters. Joining me on the line is our co-host, Miss Cali. How are you tonight, Miss Cali?
I'm great, Mark. Thank you.
Also joining the show is our guest speaker, Dan, who is also a profiler and researcher at MJA. How are you doing tonight, Dan?
I've almost located D.B. Cooper's gold, and I'm doing great.
And Miss Callie, do you remember the craze that teenage females had with the Elvis Presley movies?
Oh, yeah. It was fanatical. Well, anything Elvis Presley, right?
Yeah.
Screaming and waiting in lineups to go to these movies, like just... And the 11th time they went to it. I never quite understood it. Not even then, not now, but I mean, I guess if I was going to drool, I don't know. It would be over something I could reach out and touch.
Okay. And Dan, it's a given that the Grimes sisters had been to the movie house several times and watched the Presley movie. Do you think it's possible that someone noticed the sisters' repeat visits?
All right, before I answer that, I want to ask both of you, are you familiar with the main suspect in the case? Charles Milquist?
Yes, yeah, I heard the name, yes, yeah.
Okay, if you go through his background, it lists him as a Class A pervert, the type of guy that would stalk movie houses, make inappropriate phone calls, and he's who I'm going to focus on here to fill in some of the gaps, not exclusively, because we're dealing with an unknown homicide that you need to kind of do some what Einstein would refer to as intuitive leaping. So I'm going to do that because I have a pretty good idea of what happened, but I can't establish all the facts. So I'm going to go through his MO and what I think most likely happened in the crimes. But I definitely think they were stalked at least somewhat beforehand. Because even if it wasn't him, you have to do some basic stalking if you're going to try to abduct two people.
Okay. And Miss Callie, do you find it refreshing that in 1956, two young sisters had set their own time to be home from the movie house?
Well, it is pretty amazing. I don't know about refreshing, but actually, I'm thinking back I wasn't alive in the 40s, and I certainly didn't have curfews in the 50s, but I wasn't old enough to have a curfew. But when I look back on and hear some of the older people talking, they did things that we would have never dreamed of doing, even in the 60s.
Yep.
Like, so, maybe in the 50s, well, 56 this is, so. But the mother did expect them home by 11:45, or 11:45.
Right, yeah.
Not like he told them, but I think that was kind of like a guideline.
Okay.
So it was those unspoken guidelines they already knew about.
And Dan, because of the sisters' habit, do you think that's why their mother knew something was wrong?
Yeah, but they always say in cases like this, one of the most basic things you could do is always follow your instinct. If it doesn't feel right, a lot of times it's not right. And going by people's habits, if they're strict to them especially, if something's not right, you'll know it right away.
Okay. And Miss Callie, considering the victim ages 15 and 12, there was a sexual component. What does that tell you about the killer?
Not just the ages, but the fact that there's two sisters, two people, and he was going to force them to watch, and it was a fantasy for him, I think.
Okay.
Maybe reading into what I don't know the MO of, and that's a really good thing that you did check that out, Dan, his MO. But I wonder, like the one girl, her eyes were badly beaten around her eyes and her face, and I could almost go there. I don't want to go there, but I could almost go there with what happened. One was made to watch the other one getting raped, and then that one would be beaten in the head if she didn't answer certain things the right way or react. This be before they were murdered.
Okay.
And both might have been still alive when he left them for dead. But
okay. And Dan,
I
go ahead.
I just find it very hard because I can almost go there, and I don't want to go there.
Okay. And Dan, do you think the way the bodies were posed could have been the signature of the killer?
Yes, I do. I read somewhere earlier that the reason the cause of death was hard to determine was because it was a special type of military move designed to be a quick way to knock people out. It wasn't a traditional method of strangulation. It was a type of method designed to knock somebody out quick. They said Melquist had tried it on a few of his other victims. They had survived, as they thought these two did for some time. I don't know if you look, but their cause of death, even though it was listed as homicide, was listed as secondary exposure to the elements.
Right.
I never seen that for a murder case. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes, I've
Have you ever seen that listed officially as a homicide, not an accident or a natural?
Well, yes, on something like that, if they was assaulted and still alive, the secondary cause of death before the injuries would have been exposure. Yeah, so yeah, that's happened on several cases. Yeah. And
it's worth that Bonnie Lee Scott, the killer's second alleged victim, was also found nude on the side of the road in the same manner of repose. Although with the two sisters, I did find it interesting that, as it said they died of exposure to the elements, it said that one of them was kind of laying on top of the other one. And what are people going to do when they're exposed to extreme temperatures? Try to huddle up for body heat. So it's unclear whether they were dead when they were laying on the road or they were waiting at the road for a ride and the elements just killed them.
Okay.
But either way, because it wasn't just an easy autopsy. I read, I guess, they brought in 3 separate forensic pathologists who performed a 5-day autopsy on the 2 victims. And at the end of the day, they couldn't decide whether the damage to the face was animal predation or some method of strangulation.
Okay.
So they labeled it a homicide with, as a result of secondary exposure to the elements, and there was 3 strange markings on their stomach made by a supposed fork-like weapon.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And Miss Cali, now we must remember this was in 1956. So wouldn't posing the bodies give you an MO that maybe this has happened before?
Well, you think so. But whether or not that was made widely known, like across borders, from one state to the next, at that time, you didn't have, I don't think you had the CODIS.
No.
I don't think we had, Did we even have fax machines then?
1956, I don't believe so. I believe everything was still teletype. So.
I see. So there was that even. But the thing is, going back, I need to go back for a minute to what you were saying about what Dan was saying about the cause of death, the secondary cause of death, and all that. But you see, for them to be, their deaths were staged, like their bodies had something on them that really couldn't, like the ice pick being discovered on her chest, Barbara's chest. Well, you couldn't really do that, where that they would have moved much after he was done with them.
Right.
Like they would have been pretty stationary.
Okay.
Well, here's an interesting thing about that. We can't speak to the motives in the Grimes case because we never caught the killer. In the Bonnie Scott case, when he was being interviewed by one of the detectives, he stated that he felt compelled at some point to go back to the body, his initial plan being to bury your body because he left her on the side of the road just like he did with them, was to bury the body. Well, then he said he decided he felt like cutting her, so he cut off her head. He decapitated her.
Right.
So I'm thinking the mutilation on the Grimes sisters was post-mortem, and that the reason that she died and he might have let them live is because, see, there are three things you look at when you determine a serial killer. And I wanted to correct Mark on this a second ago. You got a signature, which is everything they do to psychologically satisfy their own needs during crime. Then you have MO, which is everything you do that you need to accomplish the crime. When you break into a house, you bring a lockpick, zip ties, all that stuff. The third part is victimology. When you look at these three as it is, what you have is three people, okay, and one of them was decapitated. You can't say that's a psychological need. Now, the MO is the strangulation. Now, with the victim, what you're going to see is he killed the second victim because he was already identified in a massive manhunt when they were looking for the first two girls. Because that evolution, changing from killing them to letting them go, is part of his evolution over time. He's learning from that mistake. Letting them go, what did it do? It inspired a massive manhunt, one of the biggest in Chicago history. He's got thousands of people. Now they're all looking for him. There are massive search parties, which I'm pretty sure he was a part of, because they get off on that.
Right.
Mark knows all about that. You gotta keep real careful lists when you do that, because what they'll do is they'll try to insert himself in the investigation, which is exactly what he did. Loretta Grimes, their mother, got a call on the day that they died, taunting her. The day that Bonnie Scott died, he called her again. I got another one.
Right.
That's, again, into the signature. He's very, very sick. And again, it just ultimately comes down to everybody's favorite subject, mathematics. What's the likelihood that three women are all going to be killed like that in the span of that small area, because they were all killed in southwest Chicago near Santa Fe Park, right next to it, it said, in that way. Like there's a 1 in a billion chance. And ultimately that's what it comes down to, is that mathematics of that chance.
Okay.
It's just, the odds are near improbable.
And Miss Cali, from my understanding, in 1956, the Brighton Park neighborhood of Chicago, where the movie house was located, was in a safe area. So wouldn't you think if someone strange was hanging out, people would have noticed?
Well, it's stated that it could be that the guy looked like Elvis,
Right.
and
Yeah.
people might have just thought that it was a gimmick. So rather than sticking out, he would have blended in.
Right. Right.
Malquist did look like Elvis, and then there was a couple other suspects, but in this case, most of them were so young that they weren't old enough to stand out as criminals. They had a lot of false confessions in this case.
Oh yeah.
It was 17-year-olds. The first one wrote out a confession. Then they examined the body and realized he didn't fit for the timeline. One 17-year-old took a polygraph, and I guess he didn't pass it. They wanted to hold him as a suspect, but I guess under Illinois law, there are laws against giving a minor a polygraph and then using it to hold him in custody. So there were a lot of false confessions in this case, which was thrown out because even back then, even though they didn't have DNA like we do now, you have to have that corroborating evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dan, the construction worker who first saw the bodies and then went and got his wife, then the couple noticed it was two frozen human bodies. What kind of shock value did that have over them?
Well, I'm sure it was very shocking. I mean, I can only ask you that question because I know you've seen dead bodies in similar situations. Can you describe just how that made you feel?
Well, it's okay. That's what I'm going to get on to next is, okay, in my opinion, the killer or killers posed the Grimes sisters' bodies to gain a graphic shock over the person that makes the discovery. And I have seen this type of behavior starting in the 1980s, where a serial killer was posing his victims as historical figures or historical events. It was so bad that the small towns and the counties covered up the true details of the murders and they refused to give a killer a name. Miss Cali, from some of the witness statements that the two sisters were talking to a young man who looked a lot like Elvis, is it possible that the guy was an Elvis impersonator?
Well, that is a good possibility, or maybe he just took advantage of the fact that he looked like him to blend in. I don't. Yeah.
Okay. And Dan, the witness statements don't match up. A classmate, Dorothy, and her sister saw the Grimes sisters standing in line to purchase popcorn. So wouldn't you think buying popcorn the second for the second showing was about to begin? Now, so what statements, Dan, are we supposed to believe? The classmate that actually knew these girls, or from other teenagers that did know who they really were? So what statements are we supposed to believe?
I think the last true statement was him buying popcorn. I mean, you read a lot of statements in this case. Some people that would swear they saw the Grimes sisters alive. One claims he talked to them and they were abruptly rude. Another claims they came in looking for a job and actually filled out the application with their names on it. But what I can't tell you, and I think you would agree because you work with the coroners before, is when they examined the bodies, they found their dinner still in their stomachs, meaning they were killed within 24 hours of when they were abducted.
Right.
Meaning all those stories about I saw them here or there obviously aren't true, because if they had been alive, that food would have no longer been in their stomachs.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. And Miss Cali, there have been several teenagers saying that they seen the Grimes sisters talking to and getting into a car with an Elvis look-alike. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. I mean, you've got these two witness accounts, and they could each be right. Like, because we don't have a time on this, except for the intermission part where it was going to the next showing, but it doesn't say what time that they saw them getting into the car. At least I couldn't see that.
Exactly, yes. And Dan, do you think they lost valuable time when the police came out and said the sisters had run away and was hiding with their boyfriends?
Yes, for a variety of reasons. And let's go over them real quick here. Number one is you have the time of day. Now, if it's early in the day, you know, when I was a kid, my sister used to disappear into the neighborhood, and it wasn't the greatest thing. And a couple times, we almost did call the cops, but she came back and got punished quite a bit, I might add. But, you know, kids do that. But number one, it was late at night. Number two, it was January. You know, just like with the Maura Murray case, they talk about she ran away. It's the middle of winter.
Yeah.
You know, where's she going to get out and run away to? Who? Yeah. Number three, they don't have a car.
Right.
So like we were talking about on our last podcast that we did here, where you have the different categories for the missing persons, right. I think this would qualify under the EMI, missing under emergency circumstances, which might not necessarily be voluntary.
Okay. And Miss Cali, do you find it odd that some of the wounds inflicted on the sisters were made by an ice pick?
Not really. We're, what was it, 1956? Again, I have to look.
Yes, 1956, yeah.
In rural areas, people still had ice boxes.
Right.
And you would probably have one of those on your farm. I'm guessing whoever this was probably had a truck, and that might have been one of the things that was handy.
Okay. And Dan, with blunt force trauma and ice pick wounds and exposure to the elements, wouldn't you say that's a form of torture?
Yes. Not in maybe the classic sadistic sense, because we can't see their method of torture. I mean, we assume they were raped, which I guess, yes, is a form of torture. When we think of torture, that might not be the first way we think of it. I think he released them into the elements because, see, when he abducted those first girls, he was a bit young. Rapists and murderers, when they start out, and you probably know this as well as I do, when they're 18 and they're young, they'll start out, they just want to sexually assault the victim. They haven't worked up the nerve to murder yet. So he lets them go because he's young and scared, but they get away. That inspires the manhunt. Now he has to murder the second girl because he can't risk that happening again. It inspired a nationwide manhunt.
Right.
So his method of torture was different because they found in the second case that he had burned the clothes and gotten rid of the murder weapon. That's why none of their clothes were ever discovered. So I don't think he watched them being exposed to the elements because you never know how long it would take them to die. Exactly. Or if they made it to the road, whether somebody would wander by and assist them.
Okay. And Miss Cali, the killings of this nature, is that the killer making a statement?
I think what I see is a lot of anger. Anger and against female.
Okay.
In fact, at the same time, like a love-hate relationship with themselves and their sexuality towards women. Could be irrational, well, definitely irrational, religious thinking that he needs to punish young girls. The other thing, when go back to these things that were left on them, like, well, the one girl with ace pick on her chest. That says that's pretty final.
Yeah.
Putting that ice there, whether he came back and put it on. It was 25 days later.
Yeah.
That was like an emphasis on her being dead. The other thing I wondered, what ethnic background were these girls?
That I didn't come across. So.
I just wondered.
I believe they were white.
Well, yeah, I knew they were
white,
but was they
heritage?
Right? Was they U.S. born? Was they from overseas? I don't think none of that information was relayed. So. And
I'm also wondering if they were Jewish or if they were Armenian, or were they? Yeah, I don't know what that name presents. That's all.
Right. And Dan, pardon?
There's a lot of irrational hatred out there for certain ethnic groups.
Right. And Dan, let's say the killer was at the movie house, meaning he had almost 2 hours to plan what he was going to do to the sisters. Do you think that's enough time to plan such killings?
Yes. If you're going to abduct two people, as long as you have an idea, again, we go back to thinking that it was Mel Quist that killed these people. There were reports that he'd taken other girls to abandoned parking lots and tried choking them. And you can only assume that if a killer takes two women, that he's already got a pre-method for their disposal.
Okay. And Miss Cali, since there were two sisters, do you think there could be at least two killers?
Well, I guess there could be. I don't think so, though. I think, and I believe it's a man. Yeah.
Okay. And the two sisters had not been drunk or drugged or poisoned prior to their death. That's a telling sign that brings us to how was the sisters controlled. Dan, if there was only one killer, what ways could he have used to control the two Grimes sisters?
Okay, there are a couple simple methods. Number one is simple enough. He has a gun or a knife. Now, if my theory holds, and this is the killer, I think it is, who abducted the one 12-year-old and the 15-year-old, he could have easily used the younger sister to leverage the older one into doing whatever he wanted.
Correct.
That's a classic method that one killer will use to control another victim by using multiple victims against each other.
Okay. And Miss Cali, just off the top of your head, have you ever heard of another case like this one that happened in the 1950s?
Not in the 1950s, but there have been over the years, but not that I'm aware of.
I have.
Okay, and what cases was
Harvey
that?
Glattman, the Lonely Hearts Killer.
Oh, okay. All
it's
right.
in the Violent Hits Classification Manual. He was one of the first modern serial killers. He liked to tie his victims up in random knot poses using a rope. And then he had a tripod camera, the ones that they used in the 50s. He would set it up and take full-on Polaroids of his victims.
Right. Okay. And Dan, do you think the killer was posing the victims on an embankment of Devil's Creek was on purpose because of the name of the creek?
It could have been to inspire fear.
Okay. And Miss Cali, let's say the killer chose the bank of the Devil's Creek because of the name. What does that say to you about the killer? And remember, this was in 1956.
Well, if he did choose the Devil's Creek because of the name, then this person would be, they would have very staunch, irrational beliefs. They'd be very, very firm in them, and they would be of some kind of authoritarian figure.
Okay.
Someone who, well, biblically speaking, and I'm not speaking biblically, but the words that come to mind are walk softly and carry a big stick.
Okay.
So, someone who believed they were punishing them for evil.
Okay.
If you equate Devil's Creek into this, then that's what I think.
Okay. Over 300,000 people would be questioned concerning this case, and with over 2,000 people was subject to serious interrogation pertaining to their potential involvement, and this was in 1956. Dan, wouldn't it be awesome if a case in our time would get such an investigation?
Yes, it would. And some do. Kids obviously get more attention than adults. And, there are certain things that people will say, certain things based on race or age or gender or whatever. But some cases do get that much attention.
Okay. And Miss Cali, with 2,000 people being possible suspects, do you think the police were able to clear them all?
I doubt it, being in 1956. But today, that I think they might have been able to do it, but not back then.
Okay.
I mean, they didn't have resources. They might have closed files because of lack of being able to get information from one place to the other, and it was likely all in the same state, maybe even just in Chicago. But, it's not like they didn't have the resources back then. And then speaking to this business of not having as much fanfare for some of today's cases, the thing is that people have grown apathetic. Like I one time put up a whole bunch of pictures of missing people in an office window, the old-fashioned office, the old-fashioned storefront,
right,
with the glass on the front and the glass going into the doorway, on both sides.
Right.
And this one lady, she came and she was sitting on the steps talking and out front, and she said, "So you put all these people up here?" She said, "Don't you know they're just dead?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Like, I mean, yeah, they might be.
Yeah.
They might. But
so we should just stop looking for them because.
Well, in her mind, they're dead, so you carry on.
Yeah.
And yeah, people do carry on, but the thing is that it matters, and it matters if people in a small town walk by and they look at, which they did, walk by and look at these faces. It's not put there for fear. It's put there for awareness, not only for themselves to be aware of their surroundings, but and what's going on in their lives and their children's lives, and to be aware of things, not for fear, but it's also there because you don't know who might know something.
Exactly. And
You can't ever presume to know that.
right.
And
Dan, by all reports, the area where the sisters disappeared from was a safe area of the city. So do you find it odd that over 2,000 people were possible suspects?
No, because what's the old saying as a detective? everyone's a suspect until they're not a suspect.
Yeah.
I can hear Lieutenant Candace saying it now.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, that's one of his famous lines.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love that man to death. He's
me
funny.
too.
He's funny, but he's also serious when he's funny. I mean, he's just something else. And Miss Cali, when the killer heard the disappearance of the Grimes sisters sparked one of the largest missing person cases in history of Cook County, do you think the killer felt any pressure?
Well, that depends, Mark. It really does. It depends on what he's hiding behind. Like, if he's just a lowly person who's not out in public much, who's reclusive, doesn't he's really not going to be concerned about anybody noting him as anything special.
As I was thinking about that question, as I was reading it on the sheet, you wouldn't feel as much pressure, I don't think, back then, because there wasn't DNA and physical evidence and all this stuff that could tie you to a crime. So long as you keep your mouth shut and, don't have a bunch of bloody body parts hanging in the closet,
Okay, Dan, now here's the question for you then. Okay, a task force was devoted solely to locating the sisters was formed with a ground search on December 29th, being helped by hundreds of local volunteers. Dan, do you think the killer was feeling the pressure then?
Maybe not. They say that true psychopaths don't feel fear. And with a volunteer force that large, like we talked about earlier, I feel strongly that he was a part of that search party. Okay. Not only just to see what they found, but also to enjoy it, to hear people talk about it, to get the attention, to get the lay of the land.
Right.
We already know that, presuming he is who I think he is, that he went back to check on the body once. It only makes sense that he would do it a second time. And we've always been assuming he just posed the bodies the way he did for other people. It could be very well that he just simply did it for himself so that he could go back and pleasure himself as sickos so often do with their crimes.
Right. And Miss Cali, do you have anything you would like to add?
Well, it kind of speaks to what Dan was just talking about, like going back to the crime scene. There's 25 days there from the time they disappeared till their bodies were found.
Right.
I don't know how frozen their bodies were. I mean, they could have been in his possession for several days.
Correct.
We don't know where he could have taken them home.
Yes.
It's not uncommon to, he may have inflicted a lot of the bruising and some of the other injuries,
okay.
Prior to them ever getting to where they were found. I don't know how long it would take for the body to freeze or to a person to die from the elements.
Okay.
How cold it is.
Size. They're not that big.
Too long.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly if they gave the temperature, what it was when this all happened, and so yeah. And then as far as freezing, there's a lot of other factors that goes into that. So, and Dan, is there anything you would like to add? Dan?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I promised you guys a big reveal at the end. Are you ready for it?
Yeah, go ahead. What do you want to add?
I'm sure you guys have been watching the news, and everything we see on there these past week is about criminal justice reform and giving people pardons so they could go home. And this is for white-collar criminals we're focusing on now,
Right.
people that are nonviolent offenders. So in this case, and I want everyone listening to understand this, the suspect, okay, Meliquist, who signed the confession, he signed a 45-page confession to the killing of Bonnie Scott, where he reenacted the murder to the police. Now, the judge, after reviewing all the evidence against him, decided to sentence him to 99 years in prison. You know, because you worked at IYC, right, that even at the state level when you're serving good time, which means you get one extra day for every day good behavior, right?
Exactly.
So if you get 10 years, you serve 5.
Right.
That's how it works in the state system. If you're in the federal system, if they sentence you to 10 years, unfortunately for you, you're going to be eating prison mashed potatoes for 10 years.
Right, right.
So in this case, he gets sentenced to 99 years, right? He gets out after 11. He lives to 2010, which is the year I graduated, and he died. So I started to wonder, how did he leverage his way out of a 99-year sentence? Because you can't cut off the victim's body.
You're gone.
Yeah, I'm
So I
Can't.
looked into the film, and what I found out was one of the detectives on the task force, Matthew Sheldon, had been convicted.
You're fading again. Dan? Oh,
Can you hear me?
yeah, you faded on
Can
that.
you hear me?
Yeah, you faded on that last answer there. You there? No, we lost him again, Miss Cali. You there?
I'm still here.
Okay, well then, let's just wrap this up because we was at the ending anyway. I want to thank our co-host Miss Cali for being on tonight's show, and a special thanks goes to Dan for being on with us. I look forward to speaking to you both again. I have a quote for our listeners. The greatest gift you can give someone is your time, because when you give your time, you are giving a portion of your life that you will never get back. Author unknown. But I would like to add to that. You might not get back that portion of your life, but you might have during that time formed memories that could be everlasting and handed down within your family from generation to generation. Always remember, folks, if you ever get bored with nothing to do, well, take a walk deep into the woods. You might be surprised at what you might find. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in, for you all have been so kind. That's the end of our MJ podcast, the series Cases from the Deep Freezer, Missing Persons, Unsolved Crimes, and the Does. This has been episode 20, part 1, the 1956 Unsolved Murders of the Grimes Sisters. My name is Mark. I was your host for tonight's show. Joining me was our co-host, Miss Cali, and our guest speaker, Dan. And we say to all of you, good night from Plattsburgh, New York.
100 days have made me older since the last time that I saw your pretty face. 1,000 lies have made me colder, and I don't think I can look at this the same. But all the miles that separate disappear now when I'm dreaming of your face. I'm here without you, baby, but you're still on my lonely mind. I think about
about you, baby, and I dream about you all the time. I'm here without you, baby, but you're still with me in my dreams. And tonight, it's only you and me. Just keep rolling as the people leave and wait to say hello. I've heard this life is overrated, but I hope that it gets better as we go. Oh yeah, yeah. I'm here without you, baby, but you're still on my lonely mind. I think about you, baby, and I dream about you all the time. I'm here without you, baby, but you're still with me in my dreams. And tonight, girl, it's only you and me. Everything I know, and anywhere I go, it gets hard, but it won't take away my love. And when the last one falls, and when it's all said and done, it gets hard, but it won't take away my love. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm here without you, baby, but you're still on my lonely mind. I think about you, baby, and I dream about you all the time. I'm here without you, baby,